Welcome back, everyone, to the George James and Associates Research Tools channel. My name is Stephen Lee, and in this short video, I'm going to explain the difference between a literature review and a theoretical framework in academic writing. I'm going to try to explain this three different ways because it took me a long time to figure this out in my doctoral program. So it had to be explained to me numerous occasions and in slightly different ways for me to finally grasp it. So hopefully in this short video, you'll have a better idea of the difference between a literature review and a theoretical framework. So what is a literature review? It brings the reader up to date on what's already been written on the broader subject in which the research question of that person arises. In other words, it's the story so far. So think of academic papers, the academic literature, as a bunch of different conversations in a ballroom. You wouldn't just walk into a ballroom and start screaming or forcing people to come listen to what you had to say. You instead go to a circle where people are speaking and you begin by listening rather than speaking. So that listening is actually reading through the literature review, and then your own contribution is going to be when you actually is the results of your findings. That's when you actually start to speak inside the ballroom, inside that circle. But before you get to do that, and before you get to express your opinion, you must first listen to what's being said, and that is recapping the literature review in your paper. By contrast, the theoretical framework seeks to apply an already existent theory to a new area of research. Think about any movie that you've seen recently where there's a group of people and they're on a quest or they're trying to solve a problem, and they're brainstorming because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to solve the problem that's in front of them. And so one person gets an idea and says, wait, can we take what we already know and apply it to this situation? And then somebody else will pipe up and say, well, in theory, it could work. That's the theoretical framework, that taking the knowledge that they already have and applying it to this new situation they find themselves in, that's the theoretical framework. So hopefully that makes sense. And I can't stress that enough. So again, this is all the time. This happens in Criminal Minds. It happens in all sorts of different shows and movies where, again, the characters are kicking around ideas and they don't know how to bypass the current obstacle that they find themselves in. And so one of them will say, well, what if we just do this? What if we, and again, it could be a car, right? What if we, you see this in Marvel's Avengers, or Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or whatever it's called, where they're doing some tech, they're trying to take existing technology that they have and they're trying to do something new with it. They're drawing on the framework or on the existing theory that they know and seeing if they can apply it in a new way. And that's, again, the theoretical framework. Very different job than the literature review. In a side-by-side comparison format, the placement of the literature review often comes after the introduction or the background of the paper. So oftentimes the paper will start with some general statements, right? Fraud is bad. Education in this country is subpar. Let's see, I'm trying to think of other examples, but general statements as to what the problem is. And then the authors will usually in the introduction start to sort of hone in on what the research question is. The research question comes out, and then it backtracks again. It's almost like a flashback to what's already been said or what's already been written, and that's the literature review. By contrast, the framework will then oftentimes come after the literature review to do with what I just said on the previous slide, which is to try to apply the knowledge we already have to something new. And so the purpose, again, for the literature review is to lead the reader from the research question and situate the writer's contribution within the conversation. By contrast, the framework connects the research question or the hypotheses to the methods section. So how are you going to prove how are you going to prove your hypothesis? Or rather, in the more technical language, how are you going to show that you can fail to reject the null hypothesis in favor of the alternative hypothesis, right? And I'll create a video that talks about the difference of what I just said. But the framework is really connecting the research question or the hypotheses to the method section, which is where the empirical work happens. Both the literature review and the theoretical framework sections have citations, and many of them. Both of them are applying that knowledge of the academic literature in new ways. So there's an application to the new work that's being done. However, one big difference is that the literature review oftentimes, but not always, will have its own section of the paper, whereas the theoretical framework, at best, usually gets its own subsection. And sometimes the theoretical framework will be a subsection, of the literature review. It kind of just depends. That's one thing that's kind of frustrating with academic papers, is each journal has its own way of doing things and laying things out. And even though a journal will largely subscribe to the American Psychological Association manual or APA style, it doesn't always do it all the way. It doesn't always subscribe to everything that's in APA. So it'll use APA, for instance, for parenthetical citations, for reference lists, and so on, and maybe running head in the headers of the paper. But it won't do it in terms of the strict sections that are laid out in APA. As far as the abstract, and I talked about this in my last two videos on abstracts, the literature review has no specific information in the abstract about the literature review. The best you're going to get in a good abstract is that, to date, nothing in the literature talks about this thing that I'm talking about, or nothing in the literature accomplishes what I'm going to accomplish in this paper. Obviously, you're not saying that in first person, but nevertheless, there is only a vague reference to the literature review in the abstract. However, the framework takes center stage largely, aside from the methods. The framework has a key role to play in the abstract because it's mentioned quite extensively. Using this theory, I do this with a method section, or drawing on the work of XYZ authors. That's the theoretical framework that's speaking in that abstract. And so it does prominently showcase in the abstract. When it comes to whether the literature review section in particular is focused on by the referees of journals, the literature review and the theoretical framework both are targeted quite extensively by referees. So they want to make sure, your reviewers want to make sure that you are hitting all of the main benchmarks or the main milestones in the literature review on a certain subject. And they also want to make sure that the theoretical framework, that you actually have a theory. Some journals will not publish your work if there's no theoretical framework. So a theoretical research is what it's called when you don't have a theory that you're working from. In a lot of journals, especially the really stringent empirical journals, quantitative journals, will not publish your work if it's not drawing, if it's not looking to apply an existing theory to something else. So that's important to know. But again, and one other thing too is that you can really tell how familiar the reviewers are with the area in which you're writing based on the recommendations and where they point you in the literature review process. So for instance, if you thought that you got everything, but then one of the reviewers comes back and says, you didn't even talk about this, and this, and these works play a prominent role in the literature review, they all deal with your question, that's a reviewer that really knows what he or she is talking about. If one reviewer says that stuff and then another reviewer doesn't, the other reviewer probably is less familiar with the subject matter. And it is what it is. It's really a crapshoot as to what the quality and the type of reviewers that you get in a journal. So you could have two people with very similar skilled authors. Almost their papers are very similar or what have you, and you submit both to the journal at the same time. One of you can get back glowing reviews, and the other one can get back heavily critical reviews. And it largely just it's a roll of the dice when it comes to reviewers. And some journals employ better reviewers than others, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. This last slide, the way I'm going to explain this is, think of this as your research question right here, right? You have the light bulb going off and you know that you want to study something in particular, and then you move through the little footprints here as you walk all the way to the house, and the footprints represent the literature review. right? It's you're taking your reader through the path to where you end up, where you're going to discuss specifics. And the specifics regarding the house in this picture is the theoretical framework. So, how is the house laid out? What are the furnishings like? Does it have a garden or does it have trees? What kind of windows and roofing does the house have? What's the color scheme or pattern or style of the flooring or the walls inside the house? That's all theoretical framework, because you're setting the scene for what you're going to be doing in the method section. But in order to get to the house, you have to follow the path, and that path is the literature review. And again, the literature review links the rest of the paper to, or I should say, links the research question and sort of weaves that research question through the rest of the paper. I hope that you found this to be helpful in comparing the literature review to the theoretical framework of academic writing. And thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.